Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first session of Literature Camp. Kyle Lehman is the first speaker up, and he's originally from Lebanon, but he now lives with his wife and their dear child, Claudia, in Paltiniș, Romania. Did I get that right? Great. Kyle has been writing poetry for about 7 years now due to external pressures from his sister and internal pressures from loneliness. Writing for Kyle has always been a journey of growing as a human being for him, and in this session he will tell us about that journey and about why he writes poetry. Ladies and gentlemen, Kyle Lehman, welcome.
So I would like to talk this evening about why I'm a poet, how I came to write poetry, things that have pushed me in this direction. Why I'm a poet. First of all, I'm a poet because I exist. I think that just by simply existing, God gave us a gift that we can then create out of. And I'm a poet just because I exist. Without this existence, without this being and being fully here, there would be nothing to create out of. So I think that I write poetry because I exist. And not only that, I exist in a fascinating world. I exist in a world that's worth watching. It's worth wondering about. And it's worth seeing and learning new things from our creation. And in our creation, as we study it, as we learn more things in our creation, I find that connection leads to wholeness. And that is why I'm a poet. Here's just a quick crash course thing on why to write poetry. What do I mean by this? Poetry is symbolism. Poetry is reading between the lines. It's taking two unrelated things and finding a relationship between them. And in our creation, in my creation of writing poetry, I found that finding connections in our world leads to a wholeness in my being. Therefore, poetry is all about wholeness, and I'm a poet. Poetry is all about creating these kinds of connections. And then I am a poet because I long to be whole. I want to live fully. I want to fully exist. I've got one life, and I want to use it up. I want to use it up fully. I want to experience everything God has for me, and I want to experience that wholeness. So it's out of a desire to feel that wholeness that I'm driven to write poetry. So I'm a poet because I long to be whole. And that's a very nutshell about those points about why I'm a poet, why I write poetry. And it's maybe not an easy nut to crack, but I want to be whole. I'm searching for something. So I'd like to talk about my life as a poet, how I came to be who I am, and I hope that all along the way you can find things that you can relate to, things that maybe can help you feel like being a poet, or maybe things you'll say, yes, I connect on that, and I agree. And I think if you'll notice a yearning for wholeness the whole way through this. Now, a quick side note. Poets are not special people. They're just normal people. And everyone can be a poet or a creator of some kind. I believe there's this yearning for wholeness in every person, and I believe that people find it in many other ways than writing poetry. They find an outlet for their creativity, maybe in gardening, maybe in music, maybe like me this summer in ditch digging. There's nothing poetic about digging a ditch, but it can be done, and I really believe that whatsoever your hand finds to do it with your might. And doing something beautiful according to the parameters of that job, and finding in that doing a release from ourselves and a connection with our community is what I'm all about. Why I write poetry, and I think it's why farmers farm, it's why diggers dig ditches, it's why many people do what they do, and it can become poetry. Your cooking, your simpleness, your quietness can become poetry. Do it within the parameters. Do it according to the rules as it's to be done. I'm kind of big on the rule things. Do it, write bound verse, and do it very well, and you'll find in that a release from yourself and a connection with your community. Now, at the end, I would like to have some discussion questions because I don't know how much time I'm going to have before 7:20 arrives. So here, very quickly, are three things you can think about before we go further. What is a poet? How would you define a poet? What makes you a poet? Why do you think you are a poet? And can poets make a difference in the world? How and why? So the last ones you can see, this is something we could talk about all night probably. So get those in your mind. What is a poet? What makes you a poet? And can poets make a difference in the world? How can they? And why do you think that they can? Those are things we will talk about at the end of session to fill in the rest of our time. Why I'm a poet. I grew up in a house of several thousand books. We had a downstairs library and upstairs library. And on a high shelf, my dad had a thick book that was the complete tales of Winnie the Pooh. And we loved it when he'd take down the book and start reading to us and read us Winnie the Pooh. So I was acquainted at an early age with poems like, the more it snows, Tiddly-Palm, the more it goes, Tiddly-Palm, on snowing. And nobody knows, Tiddly-Palm, how cold my toes, Tiddly-Palm, are growing. Often, that poem was recited in our house. And my dad also read us Dr. Seuss and his To Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street. And I would like to share that with you in case you're unfamiliar with it. And to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street. When I leave home to walk to school, Dad always says to me, Marco, keep your eyelids up and see what you can see. And when I tell him where I've been and what I think I've seen, he looks at me and sternly says, your eyesight's much too keen. Stop telling such outlandish tales. Stop turning minnows into whales. Now, what can I say when I get home today? All the long way to school and all the way back, I've looked and I've looked, and I've kept careful track. But all that I've noticed, except my own feet, was a horse and a wagon on Mulberry Street. That's nothing to tell of. That won't do, of course. Just a broken-down wagon that's drawn by a horse. That can't be my story. That's only a start. I'll say that a zebra was pulling the cart. And that is a story that no one can beat when I say that I saw it on Mulberry Street. Yes, the zebra is fine, but I think it's a shame such a marvelous beast with a cart that's so tame. The story would really be better to hear if the driver I saw were a charioteer. And gold and blue chariots, something to meet, rumbling like thunder down Mulberry Street. No, it won't do at all. A zebra is too small. A reindeer is better. He's fast and he's fleet, and he'd look mighty smart on old Mulberry Street. Hold on a minute, there's something wrong. A reindeer hates the way it feels to pull a thing that runs on wheels. He'd be much happier instead if he could pull a fancy sled. A reindeer and sleigh. Say, anyone could think of that. Jack or Fred or Joe or Nat. Say, even Jane could think of that. But it isn't too late to make one little change. A sleigh and an elephant. There's something strange. I'll pick one with plenty of power and size, a blue one with plenty of fun in his eyes. And then, just to give him a little more tone, I'll have Raha with rubies perched high on a throne. Say, that makes a story that no one can beat when I say that I saw it on Mulberry Street. But now, I don't know, it still doesn't seem right. An elephant pulling a thing that's so light would whip it around in the air like a kite, but he'd look simply grand with a great big brass band. A band that's so good should have someone to hear it, but it's going so fast that it's hard to keep near it. I'll put on a trailer. I know they won't mind if a man sits and listens while hitched on behind. But now is it fair? Is it fair what I've done? I bet those wagons weigh more than a ton. That's really too heavy a load for one beast. I'll give him some helpers. He needs two at least. But now what worries me is this. Mulberry Street runs into bliss. Unless there's something I can fix up, there'll be an awful traffic mix-up. It takes police to do the trick. To guide them through where traffic's thick, it takes police to do the trick. They'll never crash now. They'll race at top speed with Sergeant Mulvaney himself in the lead. The mayor is there, and he thinks it is grand, and he raises his hat as they dash by the stand. The mayor is there, and the aldermen too, all waving big banners of red, white, and blue, and that is a story that no one can beat when I say that I saw it on Mulberry Street. With a roar of its motor, an airplane appears and dumps out confetti while everyone cheers. And that makes a story that's really not bad, but it still could be better. Suppose that I add a Chinese man who eats with sticks, a big magician doing tricks, a 10-foot beard that needs a comb. No time for more. I'm almost home. I swung round the corner and dashed through the gate. I ran up the steps. I felt simply great, for I had a story that no one could beat. And to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street. But Dad said quite calmly Just draw up your stool and tell me the sights on the way home from school. There's so much to tell. I just couldn't begin. And Dad looked at me sharply and pulled at his chin. He frowned at me sternly from there in his seat. Was there nothing to look at? No people to greet? Did nothing excite you or make your heart beat? Nothing, I said, growing red as a beet, but a plain horse and wagon on Mulberry Street. I remember my dad pulling on his chin, and that put some more buzzwords in our household. Even Jane could think of that many times. You came up with a dumb question. Even Jane could think of that. And did nothing excite you and make your heart beat? Policemen! Policemen will do the trick to guide us through where traffic's thick. So I grew up in a family with Tiddly Palm, and even Jane could think of that. And where the school bus stopped by to pick us up at 8:07 in the morning, and there were 11 of us children, and I rode the bus with Dennis here. So we're suddenly see a familiar face when I talk about school buses. Sorry about that. The school bus stopped to pick us up at 8:07, and thankfully we picked him up next, not before us, because at 8:06 we were in the house throwing cookies in our lunch boxes or out at the wash line, hanging wash on the line, watching for that yellow bus to come over the bridge. And my mom would be singing out the kitchen window. This is the day that we break the rule, this is the day that we're late for school, And we hated it. But she also wrote poems about her garden at sunset. And she wrote about her banty rooster. And she wrote about how Leah must have felt to only know Jacob's passion for one night. And she wrote poems about what she felt the charity movement was doing to her siblings. She wrote a poem wondering if her son would ever walk again after he broke his leg. And she wrote a poem that ran, "Oh, I wish I had a cookie with fat raisin eyes to looky. There's a picture of that cookie in my mom's big cookbookie." The hired girl worked for us, and before I went to school, I remember sitting on the washing machine and listening to her sing. And she had a song. I'm curious if anyone here is familiar with this poem song that starts, "At the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains." Okay, we have some here who know, "At the foot of the Blue Ridge Mountains." I tried to chase down a copy of the poem. It's about a girl who gets lost in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and all the people go out and they find her. It ends happy. Yeah, I think it does. But she would sing this poem to us often. That same hired girl would also sing to us the song that I search and find it on YouTube, but you know the song, the little boy on the train, and the conductor comes around for his ticket, and he goes, "Please, Mr. Conductor, don't put me off of this train. The best friend I have in this world, sir, is waiting for me in pain, expecting to die any moment, sir, and may not live through the day. I want to reach home and kiss mother goodbye before God takes her away." I'm surprised at how many sad poems I grew up with. My dad would often sing that Johnny Cash song, "Ringing the Bells for Jim." I'm sorry I'm crying, but my brother Jim's dying, so I'm ringing the bells for Jim. My sister Sharon wrote poetry. My sister Sheila wrote poetry and has become kind of famous for it. And she pushed me to write too, and I think that has a big part in why I write today. Another thing that influenced me and made me, I believe, to come to be a poet is that I read the King James Version. I'm not meaning to be a Baptist Bible thumper here, but there's nothing like the King James Version to put the rhythm in your soul that it takes to write poetry. Thank you. I was recently I've been at institutions where they often read from other versions, and I find my heart every time just actually stumbling in worship because of the other versions, and it just doesn't, the words don't flow. There's nothing like the way they flow in the King James. So there's a little plug for that. I think it will help us write poetry. My first grade teacher had us memorize "Praise to God, Immortal Praise," and she would make us stand and turn and look out the window, and on the one side of the glass was our song as we sang, and on the other side of the glass was oak trees and cornfields and mourning doves and all that liberal autumn pours from its overflowing stores. There were 23 students in my second grade, and somehow I have no idea how or why, and it's amazing to think today that I did it, but I asked to sing them all a song at dismissal once at the end of second grade. And then my third grade teacher found out about it. She had me do the same. So I stood there, probably with holes in my shoes, and sang this song, "Oh, don't you remember? A long time ago, two poor little babes, their names I don't know, were stolen away one fine summer day and lost in the woods," I've heard people say. "And when it was night, they cried with their plight. The moon went away and the stars gave no light. They sobbed and they sighed and bitterly cried. Poor babes in the woods, they lay down and died. And when they were dead, a robin so red brought strawberry leaves and over them spread. Then sang them a song the whole day long, poor babes in the woods, poor babes in the woods." In sixth grade, we memorized Somebody's Mother. The woman was old and ragged and gray and bent for the chill of the winter's day. And you may be familiar with the poem. It's quite long. I'm not going to take the time to read it. But I believe that it inspired in me something memorable and something that actually made me want to reach toward nobility, to stand up in this world and do things that matter. Be willing to stand alone. Be willing to stick my neck out. I remember writing the first poem in my memory in 8th grade. My teacher was Lucy A. Martin. She's a bit of a poet herself. And I wrote her a poem, and it ran something like this. Fat pigs, thin pigs, trying hard to win pigs. And the verses ran on like that, 1 word, 2 words, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words. And she handed it back with a note saying, "It's nice, but anyone can write a poem like that." And I remember my 9th grade teacher reading us Edgar Allan Poe's poem. "Keeping time with a sort of runic rhyme to the throbbing of the bells bells, bells to the throbbing of the bells." But that's not at all the way he read it. "Keeping time in a sort of runic rhyme to the throbbing of the bales to the throbbing of the bales." And I was a farmer boy. And G.K. Chesterton says that the poets have been mysteriously silent on the subject of cheese. And probably bales are right next to that. At 15, I took off on a memorizing trip. And I memorized Papa's Letter from the poem book Poems Teachers Ask For. Papa's Letter. I was sitting in my study writing letters when I heard, "Please, dear Mama, Mary told me Mama mustn't be disturbed, but I's tired of the titty. Want some other thing to do. Writing letters is Mama, can't I write a letter too?" And then it goes on, of course, with a very sad ending. And I memorized from that book also, "Guilty or not guilty, she stood at the bar of justice, a creature wan and wild, her form too small for a woman, her features too old for a child." My sister noticed that I was memorizing poetry, and she found me Edna St. Vincent Millay's Ballad of the Harp Weaver and said, "You ought to memorize this. It's nice and long." So I did. "Son," said my mother when I was knee-high, "you've need of clothes to cover you, and not a rag have I. There's nothing in the house to make a boy breeches, nor shears to cut the cloth with, nor thread to take stitches, from top to bottom," and I can still say it today, and so it's very effective, useful in the classroom when the students say, "I can't memorize." Oh, yes, you can memorize. When I was 20, I joined a writers group who published a magazine called The Inkling. This August 2011 shot of the front cover of that. In that was my wife Claudia was part of that. I think she's the only one here today that was really involved with that. It's a little before Lynn's time. But that was my first introduction to a community of poets. What we did is made a print issue every quarter, I believe, of poems, and then we would also send in critiques and criticize each other's work in the Inkling. And we were kids. We were not old enough to be doing this kind of thing, but it cut my teeth on introduction of community of poets. And I'm going to share a lot of my own poems here in this lecture, so a quick disclaimer. First of all, if you want to put up a poem that you wrote 9 years ago, I'm happy to see it. So I hope that you can notice a little bit of growth in my poetry, and I'm not really trying to showcase it, but just put it out there so you get a look at what happened. This was a poem I had published in the Inkling. God, I thank thee. Dear God, I've been living just mighty fine. I've bread on my table and skins of wine. Yes, you have been blessing me. Thank you, Lord, for giving me all this precious hoard. I know there are others who don't have much, the selfish, the sinful, and other such. Their lives are a shameful, disgraceful tale. So steeped in their sins, they deserve to wail. My righteousness, Lord, you can plainly see. I thank you, great God. Just keep blessing me. And my younger brother, wrote a poem that was much better in the same issue or a subsequent one. Let me walk once more through the fields of yesterday. Stand still, O time. Just let me stay. Let me hold that moment, that hour, that day. I must hear more, see more, love more, and pray. Tomorrow's cares may take me away. Stand still, O time. Stand still, I say. I'm not through the heartache of yesterday when my Redeemer friend they led away. His frightened flock has gone astray. Stand still, O time. Go not away. Let me walk once more the moonlit way. Take me back to the garden. Hold sleep at bay. And there with Christ let me watch and pray. The Inkling was shut down after several years, and I went to teaching. But I didn't leave writing behind. I had a new laptop, and I thought, teaching isn't paying very well. Let's try writing. It doesn't pay any better. But I started writing some poems just for myself. And in January of 2013, as a way to try to improve myself, I wrote a poem a day for a week. I think Conrad here's done 2-week stretches, maybe some of the rest of you. I thought or recently. Have you ever done that? Okay, I won't give you glory. I bet Lynn has. Okay. Probably Maryland. Okay. I don't know. Some of these exercises are good. Just to say, I'm going to put out a poem a day I decided just for a week. So I wrote 7 poems in 7 days. And what it taught me to do was see a poem in everything. I was in the shop of the guy I was working with, coming downstairs holding his 4-year-old's hand, and this is a poem I wrote that evening. A small boy's hand holding mine securely, his eyes entranced by his feet descending, pitter-pat step, pitter-pat step. In the spring of 2013, I was 23, not quite 23, and I really wanted to make a difference in the world, a difference with poetry. I thought of Uncle Tom's Cabin and how it made a difference in a society who had a major flaw. There's a major ill in society. And Uncle Tom's Cabin just innocently changed society's view on slavery. And I thought of the catchy songs and how some of the Christian songs can actually hit near the top in popularity sometimes. And I wished very badly to do something to change society's view on abortion. I was a bit of a street preacher at the time and really cared about the abortion issue and thought if only I could write a poem about abortion that would then become a song, that would then become popular enough to change society, and we would do away with it. And so I just saw in the news someone recently, again, comparing abortion to the Holocaust, but I wrote this poem, Our Holocaust. A little group of girls standing in a line. Their little Jewish curls were formed by hands divine. Their minds can't understand what's waiting for them there. They're on the way to death because Hitler's men don't care. And one by one, Hitler shot them down. Their cries were lost in the blood on the ground. Confused and lonely, sad and crying, one by one they're dying. Today they killed a girl in my own hometown, a little tiny life, growing curls of her own. Her mind couldn't understand the sudden stress and strain, why mom would choose to kill with calloused, cruel pain. For one by one, doctors take them down. Their cries are lost in the blood on the ground. Confused and lonely, sad and crying, one by one they're dying. Their cries are lost. It's our Holocaust. I still feel that strongly about it. It is our Holocaust. And I pray for the day when our world will wake up and say, how have we been killing the innocent for so many years? Summer of 2013, I went to music camp, and I learned of the hymn contest there. And the week before the contest closed that fall, I was lonely. I was lonely a lot in my life. I've not been lonely now for the last almost 2 years, but I feel like I have spent a lot of my life yearning for things I didn't have. And I had made a phone call to a girl I thought was nice. And the contest was closing, and I wanted to write a poem for the contest, and one night I couldn't sleep. And this thing was weighing on me like, what's this girl going to say? What's going to happen with my life? Where's everything going to come out? And I crawled out of bed. I was in bed already. I crawled out 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and wrote the poem, O King of Endless Universe, we lift our mortal hands to thee and raise a prayer from broken lips to view the things we yearn to see. Though you are high and infinite, you crafted life from lumps of clay. Come down, commune with us before our flickering light shall fade away. We wish to look into your will and comprehend your great design, but Lord, our eyes on earth are dim. Our thoughts cannot compare to thine. So, Father God, who fashioned us, we seek no further than to place the hands you made into your own and follow till we see your face. Incidentally, went on to win the contest that year, and I was very blessed and happy and made a little bit richer. The March then of 2015 is when Lynn and I started corresponding, and we said, what was happening is Lynn is sending me poems to critique and saying, what do you think of this poem? And then soon I get another email, what do you think of this poem? And we had another friend, Chris Lynn, she was involved with the Inkling when it was new. And somehow I started emailing Chrislyn, and then my sister Sheila was involved in this too. And we soon discovered that Lynn was sending these poems to Chrislyn. He was sending these poems to my sister Sheila. What do you think of these poems? What do you think of these poems? And so my sister had no time for this messing around. She said, you guys just start an email poetry critique group. So Lynn and I got our heads together, and I still remember the drive home through Seattle, and I was on the phone to Lynn, and we laid out the parameters and talked about some people we thought would be nice to have on board. We decided that Claudia Esch would be a good one to have on board with us. And we started what became the Refiners, which was a group who wrote a poem or 2 poems a month, 1 or 2 poems a month, and then gave feedback on each other's poetry. And I feel like more than anything, that shaped my poetry writing. We didn't just talk about poetry on those email threads, we talked about life. And some argued about life a lot. And we had good discussions and would get together in Claudia's home. Conrad was in this, Lynn was in this, Gloria is in this. And it's still technically going, but not very lively anymore. Some of us have gotten busy. But this interacting and critiquing each other's work with poetry went a long ways, I think, in making me want to write, and making me want to write quality, and getting feedback and getting to give feedback on each other's poetry. But not only poetry, we talked about books, about philosophy and what the point of life is, and all these kinds of things that really shaped a desire for poetry and poetry. And then it wasn't long, and the one Refiner was meaning too much to me, and we started dating, Claudia and I, and our courtship was not easy. We were spanning pretty major church differences to cross over, and plus, can poets date without just drama? And so we did what we could. She came out to see me soon, and my sister Sheila again was visiting our family as well then. And Claudia and I drove to the coast to something to do on a date, and on the way back she's so quiet, and I'm trying to get out of her. What is wrong? And she's being very quiet, and I'm trying to be really chill. I want to date you. Like, we're gonna do this, but it's okay. Take your time. I was being that just not aggressive dater at all. This is just it's laid back. Give her time. Well, she went and had tea with my sister that night, and my sister got a hold of me. Claudia went to bed, and my sister got a hold of me, and she said, "Do you like her?" It's like, "Yeah, I like her." "Do you think she's beautiful?" It's like, "Yeah, I think she's beautiful." And she said, "Well, then you need to start telling her. Like, you need to start, really letting her know the way you feel. You can't just keep dating her and pretending like you're just going to be calm and cool about that." So I went out, and I was desperate to win her. I went out and wrote a poem that night and texted her and said, "Can you get up early and have coffee with me?" And we went out to my mom's she-shack there in the garden, and I sat her down, and I went and got her a cup of coffee and came out and read her this poem. "Could he who shaped her, tuned her tender voice, swept back that hair and set those eyes afire, have also bound the winding in my soul and carved the keening edge of my desire? His hands who painted her, the knowing mind that planted joy and scattered springtime hail for Claudia. Is his the heart that's calling me to come, his project to a peasant boy, to come entwine my life with heaven's grace, give earthly hands to brighten heaven's face? Could I be hers and she be mine? Ah, heart, it's more than I could ever ask or think to take this perfect gift. Yet Christ has filled your cup. I tremble, raise my eyes, and drink." That was the beginning of poetry in our relationship, and I figured poetry would help me win her, and we did write poems back and forth. "When twilight fell and all was hushed, I left you to God's keeping and wandered back a lonely road while all the stars were weeping. And there beneath an ancient oak I pushed my searching fingers down through the earth to probe those roots where springtime always lingers. We wrestled both within the night, till from strong secret places an answer stole into my heart and filled my silent spaces. There is no death while roots still live, and shadows settle dew. While I have breath as Christ, I'll give my very best to you." What I was trying to tell her in the poem, there's a 5th verse that was original with the poem that got cut off because my poems always need the last verse cut off of them. I go on to make the point, so I'm going to make the point now in case you're not getting the point. But the point is, there's still life. If there's hope, as long as there's life, there's hope. And that oak tree and that waiting, it's like, I'll give you all the time you need. Just Make up your mind the way it needs to be made up in the end, But there's no death while roots still live, and shadows settle do. Sometimes the darkness actually makes us feel a little more settled. And I was going to continue on with her. Well, thankfully, things have improved ever since. And then a few years back, the curator began, and that kind of brings us up to today, where we are, where I am as a poet. So, reviewing a few things, why I'm a poet, trying to summarize some of the story I've told. I'm a poet because my family and my community surrounded me with poetry. I think it really helped me to become a poet. And then I was drawn into a community of poets through the refiners, through the curators. And I had a desire to influence the world. I thought I could influence the world with my pen. So far, not really been successful, but I'm going to keep on trying. Some other reasons why I'm a poet is, a fourth reason would be that poems have deeply influenced me. I read poems and they change me, and they sit with me, and I think about them for a long, long time. I'd like to share two of them from one of my favorite poets, Malcolm Guite. The ordinary saints, the ones we know, our too familiar family and friends, when shall we see them? Who can truly show, while still rough-hewn, the God who shapes our ends? Who will unveil the presence, glimpse the gold that is and always was our common ground, stretch out a finger, feel along the fold to find the flaw, to touch and search that wound from which the light we never noticed fell into our lives? Remember how we turned to look at them and they looked back? That full-eyed love unselved us, and we turned around, unready for the wrench and reach of grace. But one day we will see them face to face. I love this poem because I believe the best people in all the world may be the person sitting at your right hand or your left hand, and you never know it. The agony, the pain, the suffering they bear for you. And I think someday we'll see each other face to face. Another poem that really influenced me is The Windhover, one of my favorites, from Gerard Manley Hopkins. I caught this morning's minion, kingdom of daylight dauphin, dappled dawn drawn falcon in his riding, of the rolling level underneath him steady air and striding high there, how he rung upon the rein of a wimpling wing in his ecstasy, then off, forth on swing as a skate's heel sweeps smooth on a bow bend, the hurling, gliding, rebuffed the big wind. My heart in hiding stirred for a bird, the achieve of, the mastery of the thing. Brute, beast, and valor and act, O air, pride, plume, here, buckle, and the fire that breaks from thee then, a billion times lovelier, more dangerous, O my chevalier. No wonder of it. Sheer plod makes ploughed down Cillian shine, and blue bleak embers, ah, my dear, fall, gall themselves, and gash gold vermilion. I just like it, the way the words flow. And I like it because I never quite know what it means. Why am I a poet? Poems have deeply influenced me, and the ache needs a name. We feel an ache inside of us sometimes that just needs to be put out there on paper. And I'd like to talk about 3 poems I wrote that were drawn right out of experiences like that. This poem, I was, again, experienced a bunch of loneliness in my life, and I had just come from a discussion with my parents in which I just felt so close to them. And I felt like they really cared for me, and they saw what I was going through, and they were doing all they could to reach out to me. And I remember getting in the shower afterwards and crying in the shower, water falling everywhere, and just feeling like I was happy, and yet I wasn't happy, and I had enough, and yet not enough. And I went out and wrote Denouement. 10,000 tangled tentacles of human doubt and fear are seeking anchor in my soul, through dreams fatigued by every silent year. And yet, if in my life no fairies sing or simple dreams come true, I shall not care. My only need is met, to talk tonight through falling tears to you. Another poem I wrote, so I'll give a prelude before the poem goes up, I guess, this one's been on the curator. It was written from a conversation I had with, actually, he was my bishop, and he disagreed with some of the things I was living for. And I felt like he was telling me to live for, I guess I shouldn't have said who he was so I could speak freely about it. But I felt like I was choosing a life that was harder than the life he was offering me. And we had a lot of disagreement that night. And we actually disagreed about writing. He's published some books as well. And I've not published books. He has published books. And he said, "Why do you write?" And I said, "I write because I want to influence the world." And I said, "I want my poetry to be, if possible, the best poetry in all the world." Do I feel like it is? Absolutely not. There's shameful stuff you've seen tonight. But I want my poetry to be the best. The best is the most effective. And he was saying, well, God uses the simple words and the plain and simple words. And I felt really challenged and really kind of like I didn't need to fight through that yet. And I went home and wrote The Long Winter, and so I give myself to pain. I give myself to lilies broken by the rain, to weariness, to wasted fields of grain. I face the twilight all alone, and staring down the emptiness, I dare the sun to set upon the dreams I choose to own. And so I give myself to pain. I wrestle through the darkness with a ropey rein and give my strength for tiny ears of grain. Bold blood beneath a brooding sky flows. Faith peels back the questions with an open why. And from the rubble, I raise my hands and try again to give myself to pain. Bathe ancient scars where heaven's grief falls down like rain. Her tears among these tears bear precious grain. 2015, I believe it. Yes, in 2015, my brothers and I were swimming in the river behind our place, and my three younger brothers did not know how to swim. My youngest brother drowned. I tried to rescue him, but was unsuccessful. That summer was a summer that happened in June, the beginning of June, and that summer was a summer of just hardness. And I was driving the manure truck that summer, hauling manure on my dad's farm, and it was coming fall, and I could just feel the change of the seasons, that things were moving on, and there was an ache inside of me, and that's where Must Summer End came from. Must dogwood buds that sprang from April's warmth break loose and fall? The work of June, this twisted twig sloughed off at autumn's call. Must cranes cry out at night when blades of green succumb to brown and thirsty swamps sustain a broken mass of reeds bent down? Must sockeye leave the freedom of the sea to swim upstream and waste their flesh on unknown gravel bars where ravens scream? Must summer end? Today there blew across my path a yellowed leaf. September takes her gong and fills the sky with throbs of grief. If summer ends, I too shall slip away as sap flows back into the tree. I lose my hold, descend to rest. This borrowed spirit ebbs, returns to thee. So the ache needs a name. I also write poems because I want to experience connectedness and the truth that lives in everything. And I think sometimes in poems I can almost say things. One poem that speaks of that is this, and this is one that's my favorite poem, but not my friend's favorite poem. I'm having a hard time convincing my friends it's a nice poem. Love, prayer, bluebirds, mystery, gentle words, pillowed clouds and infants' eyes, honeysuckle lit by fireflies. Sight graces fewer eyes than look. Creation is of Christ, and Christ incarnate there, these are but asters in the brook. Again, what I'm trying to say is that Christ made himself incarnate in all of creation. So whenever we look in creation, all we are seeing is, that September poem about the asters by the brookside make asters in the brook. All we see is the reflection of what truly is. And I want to see beyond and through creation with eyes that can actually see Christ. Back on experiencing this connectedness, this truth that lies below and in everything, is one of the more recent poems I've written that is here tonight, titled Untitled 47. I was substituting for my wife, and there wasn't really an ache as much as she teaches the little guys at school, and there's not much to do in her room when I'm in there. They just not color, but they do their work, and I sit behind the desk, and my students are over doing their thing in their room, but she's heavy with child and needed a break. So there I am sitting there, and I'm wanting to write a poem, and it's very poetic atmosphere. There's sunlight on the floor, there's little children. It's very good, but I couldn't. And so I wrote this: where are the poems I want to write? Where are the songs I've yet to learn? The firefly flings his sparks at night, and syllables fall from falcon wings. But broken the keys I ache to type of echoes and echoes of long-lost things. For no words rise from the Amazon. That's the river, not the company. No wisdom wakes from the Dacian wood. Silent strength flows silent on, while bird tongue breaks what no human could. Long live the beauty unbeknown, the forgotten gold in the village well. Truth stands below what is understood, while poets grow old and can never tell. That brings me to the end of that part of it. Now, why should you be a poet? Several things. Because you can. because everyone can be a poet. Everyone can start stringing words together and see how they come together. It's Guide again that says that writing poems is like setting the table. He said you just kind of put things out and all the words come together and they fit together and everyone's happy at the end of it. That's not what he said, but it's kind of like what he said. Be a poet, write poems because you have a story to tell. There's a loneliness, there's an ache in everyone that needs a name. Poetry is memorable, it's going to last lots longer than you will, and perhaps can influence later generations. Perhaps people can be encouraged by the things you've written. And that brings us to our discussion questions. I'd like some discussion. What is a poet?